In our previous videos, we explored the search for purpose and the emptiness of the existential vacuum. But today, we face the hardest question of all. Is it possible to find meaning when everything goes wrong? When we face incurable illness, the loss of a loved one, or deep personal failure? Viktor Frankl answered this with a resounding yes, through a concept he called tragic optimism. To understand this, we must first look at what Frankl called the tragic triad of human existence: pain, guilt, and death. These are the three things that no human being can escape. We will all experience physical or emotional pain. We will all face the guilt of our mistakes, and we will all eventually face the finitude of our lives. In a feel-good culture that tells us we should always be happy, the tragic triad feels like a defeat. We are told to avoid pain at all costs, to suppress our guilt, and to live as if death doesn't exist. But Frankl argues that optimism is not about ignoring these shadows. It's not toxic positivity. Tragic optimism is the capacity to remain optimistic in spite of the triad. It is the human spirit's ability to turn suffering into a human achievement, to derive from guilt the opportunity to change oneself for the better, to derive from life's transitoriness an incentive to take responsible action. This is the most mature form of hope. It doesn't ask, "Why did this happen to me?" Rather, given that this has happened, what is the best I can do now? It is the realization that the world is not perfect and life is not always fair, but our response to life remains our own. Meaning is not just for the sunny days, it is the light that we carry into the storms. How do we turn suffering into a human achievement? This is the core of Frankl's attitudinal values. When we are no longer able to change a situation, such as an inoperable disease or a tragic loss, we are challenged to change ourselves. This is where human greatness is born. Consider the story Frankl often told about an elderly general practitioner who couldn't overcome the depression caused by the death of his wife. Frankl asked him, "Doctor, what would have happened if you had died first and your wife had to survive you?" The doctor replied that it would have been terrible for her. She would have suffered immensely. Then Frankl pointed out that the doctor's current suffering was the price he was paying to spare his wife that pain. In that moment, the suffering didn't change, but the doctor's attitude toward it did. His pain now had a purpose. It was an act of love and sacrifice. Suffering only becomes unbearable when it is meaningless suffering. When we find a why for our pain, it ceases to be a mere burden and becomes a task. This is the defiant power of the spirit. It's the athlete who pushes through the pain for a goal, the parent who sacrifices their comfort for their child, or the person facing a terminal diagnosis who uses their remaining time to comfort their family. We must stop asking life for a guarantee of happiness. Instead, we must look at our deepest trials as a crossroads. You can let the tragedy crush you into bitterness, or you can use the tragedy as the raw material to build a character of steel and compassion. Tragic optimism means saying yes to life, even when life says no to your desires. It is the ultimate victory of the human spirit over the circumstances of the world. The second element of the tragic triad is guilt. Many of us are haunted by our past, by the things we did and the things we failed to do. In the existential vacuum, guilt often turns into self-hatred or despair. We feel that because we have failed, we are failures. But a tragic optimist looks at guilt differently. For Frankl, guilt is the proof of our freedom. We only feel guilty because we know we could have acted differently. We know we are responsible beings. Therefore, guilt is not a reason to sink into the past, but an incentive to transform the future. If you have done wrong, you cannot change the past, but you can change yourself now so that you never repeat that wrong. This is the concept of repentance or atonement in a secular psychological sense. It is the process of taking the raw material of a bad action and using it to fuel a better version of yourself. A person who has been selfish can become the most generous person precisely because they know the weight of their past selfishness. Guilt is a teacher, not a jailer. However, we must distinguish between healthy guilt, which leads to change, and neurotic guilt, which just leads to paralysis. Tragic optimism encourages us to stand up, admit the fault, and then ask, who am I going to be from this moment forward? Life is always giving us a second chance to get it right. As long as you are breathing, your story is not finished. You are the author of the next chapter, and that chapter can be one of redemption. The beauty of the human spirit is that it can rise from the ashes of its own mistakes. The final element of the tragic triad is the one we fear most: death. We often treat death as a thief that steals the meaning of our lives. We think, if I'm going to die anyway, what does any of this matter? But Viktor Frankl turned this logic upside down. He argued that it is precisely the fact that our time is limited that makes our lives meaningful. If we were immortal, we could postpone everything forever. There would be no reason to act today, to love today, or to create today. Think of your life as a series of pages in a book. Every day you live, you tear out a page and file it away. The pessimist looks at the book becoming thinner with fear and sadness, but the tragic optimist is like someone who carefully and conscientiously removes each page, writes a few meaningful notes on it, and files it away with pride. They don't fear the thinning book because they can look at the wealth of the pages they have already filled. They know that the past is the safest place to be. Nothing can be unlived or taken away from the granary of the past. Death is not an argument against life, it is a call to urgency. It reminds us that our opportunities to fulfill a meaning are unique and irreplaceable. Every moment is a now or never situation. When you realize that you cannot live this day twice, you stop drifting and start choosing. Tragic optimism allows us to face our finitude not with despair, but with a sense of holy urgency. We're here for a brief flash of time in the history of the universe. The question isn't, how long will I live, but how deeply will I live while I'm here? By accepting death as the border of our existence, we give the picture inside that border its true value. As we close this series on the will to meaning, we arrive at the ultimate conclusion of Viktor Frankl's philosophy. Life is not a quest for pleasure or a race for power. It is a quest for meaning, and that meaning is available to you until your very last breath. Tragic optimism is the final yes to life. It is the decision to be a hero in your own life, not because you are perfect or because your life is easy, but because you choose to remain human in the face of the tragic. You don't need to be a survivor of a concentration camp to apply these truths. You apply them when you choose to be kind to a difficult neighbor, when you find the strength to work for your family despite your exhaustion, and when you hold on to hope in the midst of a personal crisis. This is the heroism of the everyday. It is the most beautiful thing a human being can achieve, to take the tragic triad, pain, guilt, and death, and weave them into a tapestry of dignity and purpose. The existential vacuum we talked about in the last video is filled by this optimism. It is filled by the realization that you are needed by the world, even if you don't see it yet. There is a vacancy in the universe that only you can fill. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the foundations of logotherapy. You now have the map. You know the search for meaning is your primary drive, you know how to recognize the vacuum, and you know how to stand defiant against tragedy. Now, the rest is up to you. Life is questioning you. How will you respond? Subscribe to The Will to Meaning as we continue to explore the great philosophers and psychologists who help us find our way. Share this video with someone who is going through a dark night. Remember, the stars are only visible when it is dark enough. I'll see you in the next episode.